Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
In this edition of Global Print, I would like to take you to Sri Lanka and talk to you not just about the very important India-Sri Lanka relationship, but also a little bit about the politics behind the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva and the vote on Sri Lanka's human rights record. But before that, dear viewer, I'd like to make an appeal to you. Please do subscribe and pay just a little bit for the Print's fair, non-partisan and unhyphenated journalism. You know that we have been bringing you the best videos, the best news stories across these several months of the pandemic. So do help us, do continue to support us. The links both for a domestic audience as well as for an international subscriber are in the description of this video, and we hope that you will press on those links. So back to my column, Global Print, in which I talk about the very important India-Sri Lanka relationship and connect it with the domestic politics inside India. Now, just to recap, a few days ago, the Tripura Chief Minister Biplab Deb, and he's, as you know, he's from the BJP, he made some comments in which he quoted the Home Minister Amit Shah from 2 years ago. At the time, Amit Shah was also the BJP party president, and he talked about how Mr. Shah, on a trip to Tripura at the time, had said that the BJP is, that the BJP is doing so well and that it will soon make governments in neighboring states like in Nepal and Sri Lanka. Now, that caused a bit of a furor, predictably, in these countries, both in Nepal and Sri Lanka. The Nepalese government complained, and the Ministry of External Affairs officials received phone calls. Politicians in Nepal have come out very strongly against the Indians interfering, within quotes, in Nepalese politics. In Sri Lanka as well, the election commissioner has sort of, has made a more muted comment in which he said that it's not very easy for foreign political parties to come inside and set up camp in Sri Lanka, and that they have to sort of have a venture with the local group or with local Sri Lankans. Now, that is one part of the story. I think there was a lot of concern inside the BJP and especially inside the RSS, which has been expanding its influence in India's neighborhood. We know already that in Nepal, for example, the RSS has a very strong presence and a very big following, and has also wanted to do the same in other countries, especially in Sri Lanka, where they want to make this key link between Buddhism and, as you know, centuries ago, the big story or the big legend is that Ashoka the Great, his daughter Sangamitra, is the one that carried Buddhism from India to Sri Lanka. So that very ancient tie, now the RSS is believed to want to revamp and to connect the two countries much more closely. Now, these comments by Biplab Deb predictably caused a bit of a furor, like I said, in these countries, as a result of which several RSS officials in charge of the Northeast called the Tripura Chief Minister and told him to sort of lie low for a bit. As we know that the relationship between India and Sri Lanka has not been very good lately. What happened at the end of January was that the Sri Lankan government unilaterally cancelled the development of a port in Colombo, the East Colombo Terminal. That's what it's called exactly. Now, India and Japan had signed an agreement with Sri Lanka in 2019 to develop this terminal in the Colombo port. But towards the end of January, the Sri Lankan government, which is led by the two Rajapaksa brothers, the one brother, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, is the president of Sri Lanka. His brother, Mahinda Rajapaksa, is the prime minister of Sri Lanka. Now, these two brothers, the Rajapaksa brothers, are believed to be very close to India. And especially they were given the red carpet treatment when they won their election in October of 2019. When they came to India, Prime Minister Modi welcomed them with open arms. There was a lot of bonhomie, a lot of cheer. And all of 2020, of course, was given over to the pandemic. So what happened in this past 15 months or so? How has the relationship between India and Sri Lanka undergone such a difficult and this very unseemly overhaul that the government had to cancel this port terminal contract. Now, there's a lot of speculation, as you can imagine, why this happened. On top of the agenda of those rumors is that the Chinese played a big role in the cancellation of the contract. Now, another terminal in the Colombo port is being developed by the Chinese. The Chinese have given large sums of money on loan to the Sri Lankans in Hambantota, which is the constituency of Mahinda Rajapaksa, which is in the deep south in Sri Lanka. The Chinese have built some years ago this big port. In fact, they built an airport. Very few planes, just a handful of planes even fly into that airport. So it's a bit of a white elephant, a very beautiful white elephant, but nonetheless, it is something that's not being used at all. Even the Hambantota port, which was supposed to attract a lot of business with a lot of sort of cargo ships docking, that hasn't happened. Having said that, the Chinese have established a very strong presence in Sri Lanka. Now, so you saw the first indication of that is that they pressurized or allegedly pressurized the Sri Lankan government to cancel the to cancel the contract with India. A second thing that followed very quickly was that there are 3 islands off the coast of Jaffna in the north. And if you look at the map, there is a sliver of sea that separates the Tamil Nadu coast from Jaffna, which is the northern part of Sri Lanka. And there are these 3 very small islands off the coast of Jaffna. Now, the Sri Lankans, it is believed, have given these 3 islands over to a Chinese company to set up an energy project. Now, this is making the Indians see red, because this is not just an ordinary thing for the Chinese to produce some sort of energy, whether it's sort of solar energy or wind or something. This is a security issue as far as the Indians are concerned. The Tamil Nadu coastline is only about 50 kilometers away from one of those islands, and the Indian government has noted this and taken it very seriously. None other than External Affairs Minister Jaishankar. He was there in Sri Lanka in January. As I told you before, the Rajapaksa brothers had visited before the pandemic, and this very close relationship is now on the rocks. So what is going to happen? Let me give you one other fact. At the Human Rights Council in Geneva, the Sri Lanka's human rights record is coming up for review. Now, the world is going to vote on this. How is India going to vote? Remember that in 2009, when the civil war inside Sri Lanka was in its final stages, and the Sri Lanka army, not caring about the hundreds and thousands of human rights violations that they had committed along the way, the Indian government kept very, very quiet. At the time, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister. The UPA was in power. Then National Security Advisor Shiv Shankar Menon. Before that, he was Foreign Secretary. He has also been a former High Commissioner to Sri Lanka. So at the time in 2009, the Indian government held its nose and allowed the Sri Lankan army to end the war, to take it to its logical conclusion, and shut its eyes and ears to the human rights violations that took place. Not just was the LTT leader Prabhakaran killed, but his very young son was also killed by the Sri Lankan army. Now, at the time in 2009, this had caused a big furor, a big stir all across the world. The Indian government was also deeply unhappy, but they kept quiet. They held their breaths, they held their silence. And 10 years later, 11 years later, this is how the Sri Lankans are behaving, which is cancelling a contract, which is a legitimate contract, going back on their word, and now they want India's support at the Human Rights Council in Geneva on the human rights record. How is India going to vote? Is it going to vote in favor of Sri Lanka? Is it going to abstain? Or is it going to vote against and along the rest of the world? Just a little bit more of history. I just told you that the war ended in 2009, but in 2010, the Indian government voted along with Sri Lanka and against the rest of the Western world on the human rights record. So basically, the Indian government bailed out Sri Lanka. Some years later, in 2014, it abstained on that. In this particular case, the jury is out. Should India vote alongside Sri Lanka? Should it vote against it? I think there is a lot of concern both inside Sri Lanka, which wants India to vote in favor of the Sri Lankan government, but nobody knows right now what the Indian government is going to do. So we will follow this story, of course, as it unfolds. Meanwhile, do read my column, Global Print. Thank you so much for watching.